champ is here! The champ is here! The champ is here! The champ is here!
Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
Well, hello there, and good morning, Wilmington. Welcome back to another Mornings with Joe Catenacci program. Joe's off for the week, as you guys know. He's out in the Outer Banks, enjoying the sun, enjoying family, the spirits of summer, and having a great time. So I'm your guest host today, Yaël Ossowski. From the Consumer Choice Center. You guys normally hear me Saturdays at 10 on Consumer Choice Radio, and here Fridays as well at 9:30. It's a wonderful Friday morning, August 20th. Looks like it's a bit of a rainy day in Wilmington, but I think you guys are going to trudge on. It's going to be quite an awesome day in terms of programming for you, so I know you're excited for that. I am as well. Got to thank our guy, TK Turbo, engineer, getting all of our stuff in order and make sure that we can get this going out to the people, all while Joe sits at the beach with a pina colada in his hand. So you can listen to the show, obviously, on our radio broadcast, 106.7 FM on Big Talker. You can also stream live on Facebook. We have it on YouTube as well. You can find it, and we'll be linking to all the different show notes and things later after the broadcast. So to give you an idea about what we're going to talk about today, because there's a lot that's happening, there's been definitely a big sea change when it comes to foreign policy in a place like Washington, D.C., and everything that's happening with the Biden administration. There's a lot of focus right now, and I think we're facing probably the first real foreign policy crisis that we've seen in probably at least 5 or 6 years. This is a real one, and there's going to be a big impact, and things might actually be changing as well here in North Carolina and in Wilmington as well. You know, we know that there's a lot of changes to come. We'll see how that looks on the end of it. For the rest of the hour, we're going to have on, this is sort of our North Carolina hour. We're highlighting voices from our state and being sure that we can bring out the best conversations, most intriguing things on the radio, and make it very interesting for you. So our first guest we're going to have after the break is Stephen Kent. He is a name that you might not know, but you definitely know his voice, or you might have seen him on TV. So he is with Young Voices. He's also got his own podcast called the Beltway Banthas podcast, and he's the author of a new book about how the Force can fix politics. And by the Force, yes, ladies and gentlemen, I mean Star Wars. So Stephen's got some great insight, brand new book coming out. He's a hometown fella. He comes out from the Raleigh area, North Carolina fella, and he's going to be a good conversation. I don't know that much about Star Wars. Just recently got into Star Trek just because I'm supporting William Shatner and the Next Generation with Patrick Stewart. But we'll hear a little bit from Stephen. He's got some great insights as to what's happening with our politics, democracy, totalitarianism, and really what it means to have force, to have good, to have evil. There's actually some lessons that he's drawn from Star Wars. I think that's fairly fascinating, and that'll make for a good interview. Apart from that, we've got Rick Henderson. He was formerly the editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal, which I know listeners to the Big Talker and to Joe Catenacci's program definitely know that. He'll be talking to us about the night markets that are happening in Raleigh, about social trust in our institutions, and also about independent media. This here is a private radio station. There's local hosts who are on, who did a great job all week, by the way. Lillian Beecroft was on yesterday. We had our buddy Andrew Donaldson on early in the week. We had Justin from Object to the Form, who was on. Just a great lineup of guests all week long, doing a great stuff. Lend with Ben. I know he was on here too. He was spitting his mouth a bit and getting into arguments with TK, but that's what it's all about. It's radio, ladies and gentlemen. So a great lineup of guest hosts that we had all this week. I hope you guys go back to joecats.com. You can listen to that in podcast form if you miss any of the programming, not able to see it live on Facebook, on YouTube. You can always catch it on your phone. I think that's a great part of technology. So we'll catch up with Rick Henderson. He's got his own website now. He is the civil society guy. He's really great insight. He's been covering politics in North Carolina for a long time. He knows a lot about the Old North State, and he knows a lot about not just politics, but how people and culture matters in our state. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And for the last guest this hour, we've got an interesting one. Have you ever heard of the neoliberals? Neoliberalism. Sounds like a pejorative, and in many cases it has been for a long time, but there are a group of political activists who want to change that. They call themselves neoliberals proudly. They wear that banner. They are able to comment on things that are happening in politics. They have online brands. They have meetups. We'll be speaking with Morgan Rinehart. He is a collaborator over there at the Charlotte Neoliberals. I was looking for neoliberals throughout the state, and I guess I found them in Charlotte, but we'll have Morgan on. So he's actually from my hometown over in Concord, North Carolina, over towards the Piedmont region. But he'll be giving us some insight as to what a neoliberal thinks. What is neoliberalism? What does it mean when it comes to questions of zoning and housing and immigration and taxation? What would neoliberals do about the economy or foreign policy? It's an interesting political movement that is bridged between sort of the liberal and the conservative circles. It borrows from both. It's somewhat interesting. I think you guys might learn a lot. I definitely did. And hopefully we can get Morgan back onto the station to discuss a bit more. So that'll be rounding out the hour. Good first block of programming. And once we come back after our second hour, you start tuning in at around 8:05. We'll have Rachel Chiu. She's a great author and writer, giving us some great insights on what's happening in New York City with delivery. Oh boy, if you thought the regulations were bad in D.C. or San Francisco, New York has got a doozy for you. So she's going to tell us about food deliveries, all the things that people in the pandemic have been ordering to their homes, and how they're making it very, very difficult and very expensive to get that food delivered to your door. So she's got some great articles on that. Also, she tells us about the disinformation dozen. Now, I know some of you heard about this. This has to do with the pandemic and the White House actually coming out and warning about key individuals who are so-called spreading disinformation. Rachel has an article on that in the Detroit News. She'll be able to talk to us about that and other topics. And rounding out hour 2, we've got our buddy Bill Wirtz, the Luxembourgish star of the century. He's going to tell us a little bit about why American agriculture is so awesome and why we should never look towards Europe to import these policies into our country. So interesting second half there, second part of the show. I hope you guys continue to tune in. There's a lot of great things that are happening in Wilmington. I know that one thing that I would be excited about, man, I hope you guys have tickets for this. Reading the article here in the Star News, the Azalea Festival is back on. Now, this is a big deal. This is the 74th Azalea Festival. Now, this is going to be a fun time, and guess what? Look at that. Who's headlining on Friday and Saturday? My hometown boys, the Avett Brothers, from my hometown of Concord, North Carolina. They'll be traveling in. They'll be in Wilmington. You got general admission long tickets that are still available. I mean, this is starting at 7 p.m. here in Wilmington, Friday and Saturday. It's at the Live Oak Amphitheater in the Riverfront Park. General admission tickets, $60. It's a steal, folks. A steal. Great musical performances. Great things for the family as well. So you guys can check that out down at the Live Oak Amphitheater. I mean, there's so much that's happening in Wilmington. It's beautiful. It's great to know that there's a great community out there. You have beautiful weather, great people, wonderful civil society, the business people, the entrepreneurs, the workers. this is what Wilmington does well, and so happy that you guys can tune in here to the Big Talker. We've got a lot of programming for today. We're filling in for Joe while he's away on the Outer Banks, enjoying life and getting a vacation as every man should. So I really enjoy being on the mic with you guys. Hopefully we can answer any of these live stream questions that are coming in on Facebook or YouTube. We are able to answer questions, to talk and discuss. I will encourage you guys to continue to share the streams, continue listening at work, pump out the good music. That's what's so great about being part of this radio station, about being part of Southeastern North Carolina's smart conservative talk here on Friday, August 20th, on the Big Talker, 106.7 FM. So we've got a couple other things that we've got throughout the rest of the day. It's 3 hours that you're with me. Again, my name is Yaël Ossowski, guest hosting here on Joe's program. You normally hear me Saturdays at 10 on Consumer Choice Radio, and on Fridays sometimes around 9:30 we'll chat it up a little bit about the latest and greatest in consumer news. So with Joe away, I'll be your pilot here at the helm. We're going to go through many articles. We're going to go through some interviews of note and of interest, and I think you guys are going to enjoy. So we're going to go to our first break here. I hope you guys stay tuned. We've got Stephen Kent coming up, Stephen Kent of Young Voices, and his book about Star Wars, How the Force Can Fix the World, Lessons on Life, Liberty, and Happiness from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. So stay tuned for that, ladies and gentlemen. Stephen Kent coming right up. This is the Big Talker, 106.7 FM. Yaël Ossowski filling in. Hope you guys are doing well in Wilmington. Looks like it's going to be a tad of a rainy day today. Unfortunately, had some rain overnight as well, but it'll be look great for the weekend. So keep it up. We'll be right back here on the Big Talker. And welcome back to Mornings with Joe Catenacci here on the Big Talker, 106.7 FM. Yaël Ossowski filling in for you today. We've had a great deluge of guests talking about all topics. We've got those planned for the rest of the day as well. But I wanted to bring on one particular commentator, TV personality, podcast host, the man, the myth, the legend. We're talking with Mr. Stephen Kent. He's the author of the book, How the Force Can Fix the World, Lessons on Life, Liberty, and Happiness from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. You might be familiar with seeing Stephen on television. He's the host of Right Now on Rightly, which you guys can subscribe to on YouTube, and also a host over there on the Beltway Banthas podcast. Stephen, thanks so much for taking the time.
Very much thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's get into this. You've got a brand new book coming out. It's on a pre-order right now. Comes out, I believe, in late October. And you're giving us some lessons on politics, on society, on life, related to the entire world of Star Wars. And before we get too much into those details, if you had to compare between the world of Star Wars and the world of Star Trek, for those people who are into science fiction, what are the kind of main takeaways that really make those different? And why do you think you're a bit more drawn to the Star Wars world?
You know, that's an interesting question. I get that a lot. And it's one of those things where I have to be honest and say that I've just sort of always had a very monogamous relationship with Star Wars. And it is not out of any particular animus towards Star Trek. I just happen to have been raised on the wars, and the differences as far as I see them and I've understood them for many years is that Star Trek has a sort of utopian ethic. It is a future of a galaxy, of a world, of a human species who is enlightened, evolved, and has been able to overcome some of what you might consider to be sort of like base human flaws, right? Star Wars is a circular story of war, conflict, destruction, despotism, and the human search for freedom. It, I think, is much more grounded in our understandings of the human experience, our brokenness, our struggles with fear, and then also our hope for lives without fear and with more strength. So I just think that Star Wars is a more honest story about the human the human condition than Star Trek, and that's why I've always been more drawn to it.
There we go. We're speaking with Stephen Kent here on Big Talker FM. He's the author of the book, How the Force Can Fix the World. You can go ahead and pre-order that over there on the Amazon and wherever else you get your books. I'm looking at some of the themes and core principles that you mention here: hope, choice, humility, empathy, redemption, balance, and rejecting fear. And sort of what your book aims to do is to provide the kind of roadmap and to connect the lessons from Star Wars to our lives living today. So if I could ask, what was sort of the main push that got you into not just writing about this book, but I know you do this a good amount, as you relate real-life lessons that come from this film series. What exactly kind of pushed you in that direction?
Well, I think for me, it's just, my own life experiences growing up as a Star Wars fan. And we all have different Star Wars quotes that we go back to and we rely on for strength. And, my mom, not a huge Star Wars fan. If there was ever a problem and something that she needed to solve, she'd know exactly what page of the Bible to open up to and exactly which verse to tell you to go to. And one of the things that I am most concerned about in our society right now is the rapid secularization of America, the lack of shared texts, lack of shared social fabrics and ways to communicate to one another, so that we have sort of a shared Bible, a shared sort of things that give us a morality and different virtues that we center our lives around. And one of my main theses going into writing this book is that Star Wars is incredibly popular and it is an incredibly effective cipher for all sorts of different and profound world philosophies. There was a study that came out in 2019 by Statista that showed that only 37% of Americans do not consider themselves to be Star Wars fans. And I kind of spun that out to be like, if you wanted to connect with a random stranger on the street about anything, I would bet $100 that you would have a better connection with a stranger over whether or not they can recognize Boba Fett than whether or not they can recognize Thomas Jefferson. I just think that Star Wars is something that ties a lot of people together in ways that we need to talk about and go to it for different pieces of wisdom and advice. When my child is trying to work on her swing in baseball, I tell her there is no try, do or do not. There is no try. It's one of my favorite pieces of advice from Yoda. And, I think that this book is meant to be a self-help guide for personal issues that you can spin out towards the realm of the political.
We're talking a lot about democracy nowadays in our political language, people mentioning the ransacking of the capital, people talking about Central European countries like Hungary and whether or not they have democracy. What are the lessons from Star Wars when it comes to what democracy is? Is democracy important as a principle? And what more can we learn from that?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing is that you should assume that most of your neighbors, while they pay lip service to democracy being a good thing and they generally accept constitutional order, you should assume that most people around you do have closeted totalitarian tendencies, and they would be willing to throw the rule book out in a minute if it meant protecting the things that they love and that they care about. I say that with all due respect to my friends and neighbors, but that's one of the things that I think I have come to really believe and accept about American life and really just life in the West in the past 10 years, is that democracy is part of a social bargain where people are accepting rule of law and process in exchange for another thing. And if they don't feel like they're getting the thing that they thought they were in this system for, they will throw that thing right out. So Star Wars, the main takeaway line is in episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Padme says, as the emperor is making his speech, or the chancellor is making his speech to anoint himself emperor and christen the empire. So this is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause, which is to say that democracy is not a thing that is conquered by foreign powers. It's a thing that is given away by the democratic citizens, by the members of the republic, in exchange for something else. And in this case, it is safety, it is order, it is rule of law and strength. And while that is the most popular line in the movie, I actually go back often to episode 2, Attack of the Clones. There's a scene where Anakin Skywalker is sitting in a field with Padme, and he's asking her, or she's asking him, about what he thinks about politics. And he says, well, I think that there should be a system where people get together represent the citizens, and try to decide what is in the best interest of the public. And Padme goes, well, that's exactly what we do. The problem is that people don't always agree. And Anakin, this kid who's going to become Darth Vader one day, well, he says, well, then they should be made to. She goes, who is going to make them? You? And he just kind of laughs. And he's like, maybe. And, honestly, I fear that is the mindset of most people. They would be willing to go that way if it was something that they cared about enough.
You're listening to Mornings with Joe Catenacci. Yaël Ossowski filling in here on the Big Talker FM. We're speaking with Stephen Kent. He's the author of How the Force Can Fix the World. Stephen, one alternative sort of reading that I've read, I'm not too deep in the Star Wars literature, so please forgive me, but I have read that these kind of alternative ways of viewing good and evil and who the real bad guy was. And you see the evolution throughout the Star Wars movies and films of seeing Anakin Skywalker kind of grow. And it's as if, once you see the entire version of events, who you really think is good and who you really think is evil, that kind of changes. Are there other lessons we can kind of take from Star Wars on that?
Well, Star Wars has a consistent theme going all the way back to its original movie in 1977, when Obi-Wan is speaking to Luke Skywalker, and excuse me, it's not the original, it is Return of the Jedi. He is talking to him about the truth of Luke's upbringing, because he originally had told Luke that his father was killed by Darth Vader, that Darth Vader was not in fact his father, and he tries to cover up that lie by saying, well, Luke, what I told you originally about your father being killed by Darth Vader was true from a certain point of view. And ever since that line, Star Wars has told numerous stories where the same events are viewed from different perspectives. And the whole point that George Lucas tried to zero in on throughout those kinds of stories is to help people understand that their realities and their versions of truth are entirely subjective. And you could say that is right. You could say that's wrong. I'm not saying that we should embrace a postmodernist epic where there is no such thing as truth, right? Like there's 20 or 100 genders and sexes. I don't believe that at all. But we should try to understand that the way that we live our lives is tied to what we have experienced versus what we've not experienced. And so that when we talk to our friends, the things that they say are true can only be considered true if they haven't gotten the counterfactual before. They've never been presented other pieces of evidence. Star Wars cares deeply about this, and it tries to drive home that point numerous times by having its dark side characters, people who fall to the dark, being relatively good people with good intentions. Darth Vader is chief among them. In the prequel trilogy, Count Dooku, the old guy who leads the separatist movement and starts the civil war against the Jedi and the Republic, he also really went into this with good intentions, not because he was a finger-twiddling villain who just wanted to destroy the galaxy. He actually just thought the Republic was corrupt, and the Republic was corrupt. And he thought that a new regime needed to be implemented so people could govern themselves. It's a relatively noble aim, but still, he's the villain because we're watching these movies from the Jedi's perspective.
Fascinating book. I hope you guys do pick it up. Hit it in your cart. Do that pre-save. How the Force Can Fix the World. Lessons on life, liberty, and happiness from a galaxy far, far away. Stephen Kent, thanks so much for taking the time today.
It was a real pleasure. May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you. And we'll be right back here on Mornings with Joe Catenacci. Yaël Ossowski filling in. And welcome back to Mornings with Joe Catenacci here on the Big Talker, 106.7 FM. Yaël Ossowski guest hosting. And I'm very excited to bring on a North Carolina favorite. We're speaking with Rick Henderson, You might know him as the former editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. He's been a journalist for many years, up and down the coast, out west, and he brings us all the great news every single day, every single week. You can head on over to his Substack page, socialfabricnews.com. Rick, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Yael, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be back on again.
So there's a couple things that you cover in your Substack newsletter, which of course I'd recommend to everyone listening. You're someone who's followed the pulse of North Carolina politics for a long time. You've taken this new direction into covering not just what's happening politically, but also about civil society, about culture, about things that matter to people. And I thought, considering that this is a general show, we would try to cover all the topics, but also try to bring some richness to people's lives. I wanted to understand a bit this kind of new pivot within your Substack project, because beforehand, you're known as the deregulator. You're the guy who's focused on politics and what's happening with the state and with policy, but now you're focusing a lot more on civil society. What kind of made that happen?
The reason it happened was that I found that state politics had grown very stale, and that the space for providing information and news about state politics wasn't really very interesting anymore. That we've seen the same debates play out over and over again in North Carolina politics. Since so many of my contacts nationally have gone cold, I can't really speak with much knowledge about what's going on in other places. I've done a little bit of work about election reform and studied and written about some of the activities in other states dealing with election reform. But again, that's a very much of a hurry up and wait situation. A lot of things happen in a hurry, and then we wait for things to go on, and then either it's good or bad or indifferent, and nobody can really speak about such things knowledgeably unless you cover it all the time. And so I was interested from a very personal level in how the Burkean little platoons operate, how we deal with each other, since most people really aren't actively online or obsessively online. How do we interact with each other coming out of the COVID pandemic as neighbors, as people who may belong to organizations, as people who deal with the Boy Scouts, with a local with your local church, with whatever organizations that you handle, and how do you deal with that in an era in which we have less and less personal interaction because of the pandemic, and have to rely more and more on modern technologies to preserve traditional institutions? And so I found it as an interesting intersection. Deals with me personally because I belong to this stupid ukulele group, which I call my stupid ukulele group. That's actually quite important to me. It's a group of us in Raleigh who've gotten together now. We're going on our 8th year, and we meet in a church. Because of the pandemic, we couldn't meet in the church anymore, so we had to go to Zoom. And that's posed all sorts of challenges. We're having to go back to Zoom again because of the latest spike in Delta. And I took that as a way. I started writing about that back before I made the pivot. And I thought, this applies to lots of other institutions and organizations that I'm really interested in. And so that goes to, I've written about the various night markets in Raleigh. I'm this week going to write about an old farm in Randolph County near Greensboro that for 30 years has had open farm days, and it's a sheep farm. It's a working farm, and they have avoided the Got to BNC, the Department of Agriculture campaign that sort of formalizes these tours. They've stayed very old school with it, and unfortunately for them, because the owners are getting older, they're not able to keep up with it as much. So that kind of tension between how do you maintain the traditions and also stay hip with the kids.
Definitely, yeah. We're speaking with Rick Henderson here on Mornings with Joe Catenacci. You can follow Rick on Twitter at Civil Society Guy. He's gone from the deregulator to the Civil Society Guy. I love that. And you mentioned your article on the night markets. I thought this was very interesting. So for today's program, there's a lot of focus on Wilmington, obviously, but we are getting some interviews in from Charlotte, from Asheville, and across the state. And you're our Raleigh guy. And you had this article about night markets. And the title of the article is Night Markets Are Markets Too. And you discuss sort of what is happening with these kind of local farmers markets that pop up and the night market in Raleigh and some of the lessons from that. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was knocked off because of a situation in Los Angeles where a major market had sprung up in a heavily Latino working class community out of nowhere. There was a taco seller who had been there forever. And all of a sudden, other vendors started coming to this little industrial area in this neighborhood in LA. And all of a sudden, there were 100 vendors there on a given night, 5 and 6 nights a week. There were bands. There were people selling. There was a brick pizza oven that moved in and out every night. And it started off as this really happy situation in which everybody was getting along well and fine and all that. And then the news got out that this was such a successful location. And all of a sudden, problems came up. People started trying to horn in on other spaces. It got to be a little bit chaotic. Neighbors complained. People were moving in before the stores were closing. And I was contrasting that. The city actually closed it down because they had no permits for anything. This was just a total spontaneous group that was taking over public property without a permit. And so there was no security, there was no sanitation. Got to be a nightmare. What I did was contrast it to what's going on in Raleigh, where a couple of women who were friends have started with one little market. And this is much like the night markets in Asia, where you have not only food vendors and craft vendors, but you have local music. You'll have jugglers, you'll have magicians. They put up lights. It's a very festive kind of atmosphere. And so they've done this. They now have markets in Raleigh, Durham, Apex, Cary, and Garner. They have 4 different locations in Raleigh. It's typically one event per month per market. And they've done it all, I think, the right way. They've obtained a relationship with local officials, with local businesses, with people who are the neighbors who live there. They set them up for a few hours a night, once a month, and it's a very happy situation for everyone. It's a situation in which they're very successful. Our youth group played there. They invited us to play the very first one, and they went from 80 vendors to 120 vendors the first week, up to somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 people attending the market in a part of Raleigh that's not that close to downtown. It's not an area that's easy to get to. And they're at the point now in which they're in the process of preparing to essentially take that template, franchise it, if you will, and bring it to other places. So you may be seeing night markets in Wilmington fairly soon. You may be seeing this sort of thing replicated. They would very much like to do this because they have a model that works. And it does involve working with local law enforcement, with city officials, with neighborhoods, and they're a good neighbor. And because they've got their own security, their own sanitation forces, all that sort of stuff, they don't leave a footprint behind. It's a lot of fun. And I think it's a great way, again, to support local vendors and for people just to go out and have a good time. And it's just a lot of fun each time you go.
Yeah. And I love your point about trust and sort of what that means economically. And that's one thing I've always noticed traveling around is that you have varying levels of social trust in different communities and societies. And when you have social trust that's high, that means that people are not, scurrying after you to make sure that you pay your bill and asking you to prepay. There's generally this kind of trust that exists that when things are over, you'll pay your bill. It's fine. People aren't hassling you. And people have reputations, and that in itself is a kind of currency. And to see that evolve in this example that you give at the night market, I think is great, because that's something that we need a lot more of. So much of our interactions and things have been thrust online. Wouldn't it be great if we were to get back to business, be out on the streets, walking, interacting, and actually sharing smiles and laughs instead of just clicks and emojis, right?
Yeah, that's the thing that really impressed me about the night market to begin with, which was in 2018 that they started these in Raleigh. This was before anybody had any concept about the pandemic, but it was just it was an extremely uplifting experience. And as I've said in some pieces about this earlier, it got too big for us real fast because we don't have professional level PA system. And when you got 5,000 people wandering around in narrow little cobblestone streets of the city market area of Raleigh, when that's happening, you can get drowned out pretty easily. And so we just said, we can't do this anymore. And they said, okay, fine. That's not a problem. But we're going back to one of their newer locations, which is more open now. And so again, it's that level of trust that you talk about. It's really important to be able to communicate with folks personally on a one-on-one level, and to do so and to say, we can do this in a mutually beneficial way. And it's a great example of how markets work, that people are engaged in voluntary interactions and everybody benefits. It's a win-win situation.
Well, we're all about win-win nowadays. We don't have many things to win or say that we are winning in. And I do want to point the listeners over to your website, socialfabricnews.com. Rick is going to give us all the latest and greatest. You have multiple posts per week, which is great. You have some podcast as well coming out, good conversations. So, Rick, thanks again for providing us good value there. Thanks again for your writing. And hopefully we can get you back on the radio soon. Not enough time to talk to you. But again, thanks so much for what you're doing.
Thanks very much, Yael. Merle Fest is coming up in September, and that's going to be the biggie. So that I got a lot planned about that.
There we go. You can hear him there, and maybe he'll be whipping out the ukulele, and you guys can hear it there. So, Rick, thanks so much. We'll be right back here on Big Talker, Mornings with Joe Catenacci. And welcome back to Mornings with Joe Catenacci. I'm your host, Yaël Ossowski, filling in for today. Joe is out in the Outer Banks enjoying life. And since we've already had a big North Carolina-themed hour, we had Stephen Kent, we had Rick Henderson, I figured we'd stay in the Old North State here for a bit, and I wanted to bring on Morgan Rinehart. He's a co-organizer for the Charlotte Neoliberals and vice chair of the Neoliberal Projects Steering Committee. Morgan, thanks so much for coming on the radio program.
Thanks for having me.
So a couple things I wanted to get into. Many people might not be familiar with what it means to be a neoliberal. They might have heard this term. It's been used in a negative connotation by some, positive connotation by others. What does it mean in 2021 to say if you're living in Charlotte, North Carolina, or Wilmington or Asheville, to be a neoliberal?
Well, you're right that it's generally used as a pejorative going back to the 1910s and 20s in Germany, and didn't really sort of come into a positive use until about the 30s or so, with folks like Hayek and the Mount Pelerin Society. In this year, where we're at now, we started the Charlotte chapter in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, and we're a group that is focused on housing issues, on relaxing zoning, better urban design, so emphasizing projects in public transit, being able to take trips safely on bicycle or by walking, things like that. That's our big focus sort of in Charlotte and everywhere else.
Okay, and you mentioned something that I know a lot of people here in Wilmington care about, and I know that's the same throughout the Carolinas, and that's construction and building and, talking about getting rid of many of the burdensome and onerous zoning regulations. What is it that makes it so difficult to grow if we do have zoning laws that are a bit too restrictive? What is sort of the negative externality of that?
Well, it limits your supply. And so supply and demand works for widgets, it works for potato chips, and it works for housing. And if you aren't able to accommodate a rising demand by increasing supply, building housing of any kind, single family up to apartments, then you're going to see an increase in prices. And the market now, which is it's very hard to buy a house if you're in that sort of market, and the prices are very high. You have to offer many thousands of dollars over the asking just to be considered for it.
You're listening to Mornings with Joe Catenacci. We're speaking with Morgan Rinehart, co-organizer for the Charlotte Neoliberals and a vice chair of the Neoliberal Projects Steering Committee. Now, if I'm able to go over to your social media here, Morgan, I see local chapter of the Neoliberal Project. You're all about YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, urbanist, high-energy liberalism, and a craft brewery on every corner. I know that'll make a lot of ears perk up. Our state has had a great amount of growth when it comes to craft breweries, but you say we need even more on every corner. What does that mean?
It doesn't necessarily have to be craft brewing, but Charlotte has over 30 last time I checked. I believe it was 33 just in the area of Mecklenburg County, so the greater Charlotte area, and being able to so if you could have the usual line is a taco truck on every corner, which came up during one of the last presidential campaigns where someone warned about Hispanic immigrants coming in. There would be a taco truck on every corner. So this horrible thing. It's like, that actually sounds pretty good. So it could be taco trucks, craft brewery, stores, something, anything, right? So just the ability to have a mixed use area is the idea.
Okay, yeah, I think that we've seen a lot of that, and in particular in Raleigh, they've been able to build up that. Charlotte sort of has its own. I know that Birkdale Village is a good example. If you go up to 77, that's been really interesting to see. If someone's listening to this, and this is conservative talk radio, if someone might consider themselves conservative, what could be some kind of common areas of agreement that many conservatives, particularly those that are active at the local level, those who participate at the city council, at their county commission, those who pay attention to what's happening in state politics, how do you think they could learn from the neoliberal movement, and what kind of lessons do you think conservatives specifically can kind of take from that?
One of our core ideals is that free markets are incredible for their wealth generation and for their ability to create opportunity. Our spin on it is to add a strong social safety net so people don't get left behind, to make sure that people are able to have the freedom to move where they want, they can live where they want, they can start their own business, things like that. So it's a lot of personal freedom for folks to live in a free society.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think even if you were to poll many conservatives in North Carolina, I think they would somehow fall into that camp a bit. There aren't too many people, as far as I know, that are arguing for scrapping the entire social safety net, but I think you bring up a good point there. We talked about zoning. We're talking a little bit about free markets, about additional trade. When it comes to particularly state issues and state politics, what is the neoliberal project in Charlotte specifically kind of paying attention to? And are there some things that are very positive that are happening in Raleigh that you're seeing? Are there some things that you're concerned about? What should we really be looking at?
There's a bill in the Senate right now. I can't recall if it's gone to a vote to the whole Senate yet, called S349. And it is going to legalize basically infill housing. So earlier we talked about zoning and how that's restrictive. Well, what it does is that zoning legally limits what kind of housing, or anything, but generally housing, you can build on your property. In Charlotte, 84% of residential land area is zoned for single family only. So if you wanted to build a duplex, you can't do it. City won't let you. So the S349 statewide allows the building of duplexes, triplexes, and higher, which aren't, they fit in nicely to any city's aesthetic, and they've been sort of the norm up until the suburban boom back in the 50s. You would have these higher density housing available.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of good examples there, and I think there have been some bad examples too. I remember just a couple of years ago, there were a lot of these tiny homes that went up for sale, and there were a lot of people who were kind of crying that they did not want any in their backyard, and a lot of the fees that were associated and a lot of the zoning rules just kind of didn't mash up. I mean, this stuff is it's interesting because it's allowing for a kind of more humanist approach to some of these housing questions, which I think you would likely argue so far have always just thought about how do we get more people into homes, and not necessarily how do we get more people housed. Would that be correct?
Well, they sort of follow the other. You can't, so for example, like with folks who are homeless, one of the best ways you can get them out of that is to be able to provide them housing. Well, if housing's, the average price is climbing up near $300,000 in the Charlotte area, which is unfathomable from 10 years ago, it's very hard to find some sort of stability for these folks. And being able to accommodate people who need help, like homeless or folks who are moving in from out of state, and they won't stop coming even if the prices are high. I mean, Charlotte's looking to add almost 400,000 people in the next 20 years.
Oh wow, yeah, great number. I know that we have that population growth. We just had those numbers that came out from the census. North Carolina overall growing big time, and there's a lot of people moving here. There's definitely going to be a lot of demand for construction, for homes, apartment complexes. So that'd be very beautiful to see. If people want to get involved with the neoliberals in Charlotte or elsewhere, where's the best place they can go, Morgan? Because I know you guys got a very good social media presence, so I definitely recommend that people go to your your Twitter handle there. It is CLT Neoliberal, and follow a lot of things that you guys are doing there. But how else can people get involved if they're interested in this? They like what you're talking about, they like the way that you're approaching it, and maybe have some additional questions.
Yeah, Twitter's excellent. I check that every day, so feel free to send us a private message there. You can also email charlotteneoliberal@gmail.com. And if you're more curious broadly about the project as a whole, there is neoliberalproject.org and our online magazine, Exponents Mag.
Well, I love it. There's a lot of great information there. You guys can find that if you are interested. There's definitely a lot of very good policy suggestions that I think a lot of people would appreciate, and some different ways of thinking about it. And we don't necessarily have to think about parties. There are actually great ideas that we can champion, and that's why I wanted to highlight that. So, Morgan, thanks so much for coming on the program. We've been speaking with Morgan Rinehart, co-organizer for the Charlotte Neoliberals and a vice chair at the Neoliberal Project's Steering Committee. Morgan, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me today.
Perfect. And we'll be right back after these messages, guys. And stay tuned to your radio mornings with Joe Catenacci, Yaël Ossowski filling in here on the Big Talker. Be right back after these messages. We got plenty more to come. Back here on Mornings with Joe Catenacci, Yaël Ossowski guest hosting on this beautiful Freedom Friday, August 20th, 2021. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you everyone for listening on the streams that we've got online. It's another great morning here in Wilmington. Just finished up hour one, starting hour two. I got to tell you, it's a new morning. We're past 8 o'clock. We've got some great interviews coming up. Let's recap that last hour. I mean, we got Star Wars on one hand. We're talking about night markets in various cities, talking about what it means to be a neoliberal. I wonder, do any of you guys consider yourselves neoliberals? Is that something that seems interesting to you? Do you think the label is too far gone? Neoliberals in the old school were kind of what Noam Chomsky and the progressive academics would label those who are all in on corporate power. But nowadays, it's a bit of a different definition with what neoliberal is. It's kind of interesting to hear from Morgan Rinehart in that last segment, understanding a bit more about what it is. Is this something that will take root in North Carolina? Are we going to have proponents in Wilmington and Asheville and Raleigh and Charlotte? I couldn't tell you, but I'll tell you it's interesting. And it's something new. It's something on the horizon. And particularly amongst younger people, seems to be catching on. Maybe that's just the algorithms working their magic on me, as Joe would say. But regardless, something interesting that I know you guys hopefully got some value from. It's going to be a great morning here in Wilmington. Again, mentioned a little bit of rain that's scattering throughout the region. But we've got all kinds of events going on over the weekend. I mean, you guys got the beach in your backyard. Wonderful time to get out there, and wonderful time to enjoy that time with family, as long as the lockdown proponents permit it. We won't get into too much of that right now. We will have a wonderful guest in the next segment. Rachel Chiu will be coming on. We'll be talking about socialism, capitalism, and how minority voices who support things like capitalism never, ever really get a say. She's got a great article in the Orange County Register about just that. We talk about food delivery, taxes, permits, and fees, and then we'll also hit upon the disinformation dozen, social media regulation, networks, and the role of the government. So some very good stuff coming up with Rachel Chiu. That'll be coming up after the break. For now, let's get into a little bit of the stories. I know that I've been popping open the Star News here in Wilmington, trying to find out exactly what people are talking about, what is getting people upset. You can tune into the Big Talker. There's an article here actually about the restaurant workers who are leaving the industry, and a lot of it is highlighting the effect of the pandemic, many of the restrictions. Many of you guys could not go out and go to the restaurant. Maybe you couldn't go out and enjoy something great to eat. Maybe you worked at a restaurant. Maybe you were a manager. Maybe you were working in the back of house or front of house. And now a lot of people are leaving because of the uncertainty. This is exactly at the same time that we're hearing about all of the different labor shortages that are happening, not just in North Carolina, not just in Wilmington, but around the country. And there's an article here in the Star News that's just talking to the various people who are leaving. It comes down to stability. It comes down to the ability to make an income, to make a living. We have to think about the different consequences of our actions when it comes to not just the lockdowns, not just testing, but also the vaccine passports, requiring people to have them if they go into a business. I know Joe's been hot and bothered about that one, so don't need to hear me on that topic. I know you got a lot more to come on it. But when you talk to people who are working in the industries, when you talk to people who've been in the restaurant industry, something that I've done as well, I worked at Chili's and I worked at O'Charlie's. Now I'm on the radio. But I worked at these places, and I worked with people who were single mothers. You had people who had transitioned out of other careers. You had students. You had older people who were just trying to save some money for healthcare. There's all types of people who work in the restaurant industry. I mean, a lot of immigrants, obviously. And to know that that labor force is shrinking, that there are less people who are going to be working in the restaurants, not just serving the food, but making the food, cooking the food, everything else. This is not the best thing for our economy. It's definitely not good for tourism if we have people who are coming to Wilmington to enjoy the shore, the beaches, to enjoy the movie sets, to enjoy the great downtown. This is something that is going to negatively impact a lot of stuff. And we have to really think about what rules exist and what rules are in place that are making it so tough. There's a lot of focus on what's happening with unemployment benefits that are being extended forever. For some people, they need it. For many others, we can probably see that it's gone on too long. And we've seen from every single indication that there are plenty of openings. There are plenty of openings for jobs. Myself, I had a friend who is in the Charlotte region, was kind of in between work, wasn't sure about what to do, was very uncertain about the economy at the time. I said, look, all you got to do, open up the app, open up your phone, go to the Amazon site, go to the warehouse, put down an application, and see what they can do for you. And God Almighty, yes, sir, within a few weeks, he was working there, making money, choosing his shifts, and ability to actually make some income so they could figure out exactly what he wanted to do. That's just one example, but I know there are plenty more out there. I mean, how many businesses have you heard of that have had to shut down because they don't have access to labor, because they don't have the particular specialists in mind anymore? They don't have access to those people, or they haven't come back to work. These are the things that are impacting normal, everyday people and entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs, we should remember, these are the people who provide goods and services because they see that it is worth it to do so. They have an incentive. You, as a customer, have an incentive to visit said shop or said service. They have an incentive to provide. And it's that exchange. That's something that we've learned, over the years, over decades, over centuries. That's what Adam Smith discussed when he was but a Scottish philosopher. It's not just from the benevolence of the butcher, he would say, that we're able to have all the wonderful meat on our table. It's because of that free exchange, because I need to have that various meat, the butcher needs to sell it, we meet in the middle at the apex, That is that transaction. It helps me. It helps him. That is what the market is what about, and it's what free exchange is all about. It has nothing to do with any labels of capitalism or socialism. It's free exchange. It's you and me. We come together. We both have needs. We help each other out, and we both end up being happy. And for so many people in Wilmington, for restaurant workers, not just here, but across the state, that really isn't working out, especially between employers and employees. And there's a lot of bad incentives out there. There's a lot of things like a higher minimum wage that makes it actually very difficult for younger people to get a job, for the less educated to get a job. It actually does make it more difficult if we require employers to pay people more than what the natural wage would be. And this is a point that really does trigger a lot of people who haven't thought about it from the point of view of economics. The fact that minimum wage is actually something that is harmful, because the idea that might be propagated in various bars and cafes in Brooklyn is that if you don't have the minimum wage, then you'll have people working for 15 cents. You'll have people who will have to work for $2 an hour. When we look at today's economy, employers are running after people to work for them. And what they can do is they can raise the wage. And when you have that type of competition for labor, you're not going to be paying people 20 cents. You're going to be paying people $15, $16, $17, $18 an hour in order to get your good to market, to provide a service to customers, and to do all those great things. And that's something that is never really emphasized. We don't really even hear it or see it in the business press. You know, if you read the local business journal in Wilmington or anywhere else, you don't see a praise of entrepreneurs, a praise of free exchange. It's always about the nickels and dimes of particular decisions, what the regulation is on X or Y. Let's remember what's at the base of all of this. Let's remember what's at the core of the fact that this country has grown to be so rich, so great, so much higher than other countries when it comes to GDP, when it comes to measuring how people are doing. There's a lot to celebrate out there. Our system has turned out some of the richest, most creative, most innovative people, and some of them are probably in this town right now. There's a whole generation to go. We got more program for you here on Big Talker FM. We'll be right back with Rachel Chiu. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Mornings with Joe Catenacci. Yaël Ossowski here, guest hosting for this Friday. And I wanted to get on the smartest and most innovative voices that I could find for this program. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've got so much more to come. And that's why it is my privilege to host Rachel Chiu here on the program. She is a Young Voices contributor. She works at a DC-based think tank. You can find her words plastered across newspapers, the internet, and the like. Rachel, thanks so much for coming on the morning program.
Thanks so much. It's great to chat with you this morning.
So there's a couple things I would like to get into, definitely highlighting your latest articles. One that we love to do here is we love to bag on New York. And specifically, I'm referring to an article that you have in the New York Daily News, no slouch of a newspaper. But the New York City Council just passed a bill that is actually going to put a lot of personal information at risk. It's going to actually sink many restaurants, and it's going to make it more difficult to get third-party food delivery services to get them in the streets, rolling and delivering food to our doors. We're getting told every single day that there might be more lockdowns, more masks, more of everything with Delta. And one of the great things that we have at our fingertips are these food delivery apps. But you're telling me that in New York, that might be in danger. Tell us what that is about.
That's right. So the New York City Council recently enacted a bill called the Data on Orders Placed Through Third-Party Food Delivery Services. So as the name implies, this is going to affect millions of New Yorkers who use apps like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, and the like. The bill would require third-party food delivery apps to share sensitive customer information, their name, phone number, email address, delivery address, with restaurants. So the problem is that consumers use these apps for a reason. They want a fast, reliable, and secure way to order their food. Big companies like Uber can provide that, but small mom and pop restaurants simply cannot. They don't have the infrastructure to protect user information, and small businesses are already prone to cyber attacks and data leaks. So as a result, there's going to be a lot of fallout affecting both consumers and restaurants. And so even though this happened in New York, and even though it's already passed, consumers in North Carolina and around the country should learn from this. And there really are a lot of lessons to be learned.
It really comes down to so many of these legislators that see these great new innovative ideas pop up. And it's as if they either want a piece of the pie or they want to have, the taxes. We've heard about in various cities, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, San Francisco, they've tried to pass these various bills and taxes they would tack on to these deliveries. Do you see this? Does this have anything to do with, protection of people who use these services, or do you think this is another wielding hand of the government that's at play?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think with this one, it seems that the council wanted to help restaurants, right? So they've been having a really tough time over the past year, like everyone else, but they've really been hit hard. And I think that they saw this as a way to show that they care about restaurants and really act upon what they've been saying about how they're going to help them. But in the end, this is not a good idea. This is something that is a little bit half developed. And because there's so many problems with it in terms of privacy, the fact that restaurants, at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to protect user information in a way that doesn't put them with increased risk and liabilities.
Now we're here on the Mornings with Joe Catenacci show. Yaël Ossowski filling in. We're speaking with Rachel Chiu. You can follow her on Twitter, Rachel HCHIU. Read all of her writing, comments, and the like. We're talking about her article here in the New York Daily News about the food delivery bill in New York City. And this is not just a New York problem. This will be happening in many big capitals and large cities. So definitely something to look out there. Well, another thing I wanted to point to, Rachel, you have another article. This time you're over there in Detroit. Man, you're hitting up all these capitals. It's great, and big cities. This one is about the Disinformation Dozen and about the role of the White House in becoming the arbiter of misinformation. Obviously, the pandemic has given us lots of cranks. It's given us cranks on, I think, all sides. I think everybody would say that. And now we have this new scrutiny upon tech companies, upon how they moderate comments and posts. And now the White House has gone a step further and said that they're singling out 12 people that they call the Disinformation Dozen, and essentially saying that Facebook or Twitter or any of these other organizations should do more, and they're not doing enough to try to either scrub these comments, to drown these accounts, or to really get them off the platform. So what is happening here, and why do you think we should be concerned about where this is headed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So a few weeks ago, the White House press secretary highlighted 12 people who she claimed were producing 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation on social media platforms. And I think this is one of the first times we've really seen something like this, where a White House official singles out Americans. And I mean, everyone has their own opinion on, how we should handle this pandemic. I know that the anti-vaccine debate is very contentious, but I think even for those of us who believe that the vaccine is a good thing, we should be able to see that pointing out 12 people and saying that they're responsible for a lot of the problems we see today is simply not right. And I think from a First Amendment standpoint, even though what they did doesn't violate the First Amendment, it comes really close by saying that Americans are doing something, have misconduct on these platforms, and then trying to censor what they say. I think that comes really close. And even though we can't say it's a First Amendment violation, it's something that we should be very wary of. And it definitely has to be called out.
It's one thing when we have pressure from civil society groups or different companies that are putting pressure on these social media networks. it's yet another thing when the White House press secretary is calling them out. And I think you're definitely right on that. It's right up on that line. And I'm kind of wondering, what is the kind of expectation with the social media networks and moderation? Because as we know, the moderation rules are created by human beings, carried out by human beings, people with biases on all sides. I'm not the first person to bring it up on talk radio this week, but as we well know, the Taliban is, they've got their own active Twitter account, but former President Trump does not. It tells you a lot, but it's just so muddled. What are the expectations on these companies, and really what is realistic of what they can do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's evolving, right? So social media companies have really been pushed more in the past year than they ever have before when it comes to content moderation. And I think that's something to note, is that they're not going to get everything right. And they're going to do things that government officials, the public, their users, that they're not going to be fans of. But at the end of the day, social media companies are private businesses. They are also protected by the First Amendment. And I think that there needs to be some room for them to fine tune their content moderation policies. And certainly as they do that, the White House should not be telling them how to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is the age-old lesson that I know that we've talked about on other programs is that as soon as you empower one government institution with whatever power it is, some discretion, you should expect that the political opponent will come back the next year and do exactly the same thing to your side. So we have to be careful of how the pendulum swings. All the tech debate, though, has sort of, I don't want to say it's died down, but we haven't seen as much pressure lately. Perhaps that'll be coming in the fall. What do you think are the big sort of political fights that people who are interested in these issues when it comes to social media and social media regulation? What should we be looking out for as Congress comes back into session towards the end of the month?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different issues. We're seeing Section 230 content moderation issues come back up. We're seeing a lot of antitrust as well, and that directly affects technology companies. Congressmen are going after big tech right now. And I think the antitrust issues are certainly ones to watch. I know that it's a little bit more complicated to understand, but the bills that are being proposed right now that are currently in the House, they will radically change the customer and user experience. They will change the way that platforms like Amazon, Facebook, Google, the way that they're run and the way that they're used. So I would definitely say that's the one to watch out for.
No, that's coming to us very soon. So thank you, Rachel, for that. I want to highlight one last article of yours here in the last minute and a half I got with you. Article from the Orange County Register. The socialism versus capitalism debate needs more minority voices. Those of us on Conservative Talk Radio are going to love this. We'll definitely link to all of these in the show notes, guys, so you can get a look at that. Rachel, you're looking at different polls, and you're looking at attitudes of minority voices when it comes to capitalism versus socialism. You use some experience of your own family, and basically saying that there's a lot of different things that aren't being discussed or talked about or even thought about when it comes to how we discuss socialism and capitalism in the 21st century. How would you explain sort of what you go into here?
Yeah, so my op-ed was centered around a recent Axios poll. And the bottom line of that poll is that America is moving towards socialism and that American attitudes towards it are starting to soften up. And when I read that, it really was kind of curious to me because for families like mine or immigrants who have come from countries that had socialism or communism, we know that it's not something favorable, it's not something good. And the way that it's portrayed nowadays, especially with the rise of democratic socialism, it's like an idea that you can opt into. But for people who have seen how it works, that's certainly not the case. It's really hard to turn it back, and we don't get to decide how far socialism gets to go, which is, I think, a tenet that democratic socialism likes to portray, that, oh, we're not going to go as far as authoritarian socialism of the past. Well, we don't get to decide that. And I think when we're talking about this discourse around socialism, especially in America, we really need to hear more voices from people who have actually experienced it and know the harm that it causes.
Yeah, we know everything that happened in Cuba. We know what's happening in the streets now, and many more lessons to tell. So that's Rachel Chiu, Young Voices contributor. Rachel, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much.
And we'll be right back here on the Mornings with Joe Catenacci show. Yaël Ossowski filling in. Plenty other interesting guests coming up in the next couple of hours. And welcome back to Mornings with Joe Catenacci here on the Big Talker, 106.7 FM. I am filling in for Joe, Yaël Ossowski here on the mic. We've had a great couple of hours here on the radio program, talking to some great people from around the state, around the country, and now we want to go around the world. Why not? That's what we do here. And I'm speaking with my colleague, Bill Wirtz, Senior Policy Analyst at the Consumer Choice Center. You can also hear his podcast, Consumer, spelled EU, on the App Store, in the Android, Google Play Store, wherever else you might hear your podcast. Bill, great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me, Yael.
So one thing I wanted to talk about with you, as you tend to be the subject matter expert, and something that's fairly important here in North Carolina is agriculture. Now, North Carolina is a big pork state. We've got soybeans. We've got a bunch of stuff out west, a lot of things out here in the east. And one thing that we started to see is the rise of progressive legislators who are looking over towards your continent of Europe saying, you know what, these guys have some really good ideas on what we should do with agriculture. However, you say here in a recent article in the Journal Courier, the U.S. should not look to Europe for the future of agriculture, and you kind of give a warning. So, Bill, what is this all about?
Well, when people travel to Europe, there's a certain food culture in Europe. You know, you go to France, you can go to any bistro and you can eat well. And that's a cultural thing that Europeans think they have and that nobody else is able to have. But of course, you can have a lot of good food in the United States as well. And the question about food quality is all about legislation, but also about innovation. There's a lot of people you will know in your surroundings that are of the belief that anything that is natural is automatically good. But what we do know in agriculture is that nature is not always a friend of ours, and nature sends us insects and all types of different problems with our crops, and we have to fight these problems with crop protection. Now, in the United States, crop protection since the 1960s has made enormous strides, has improved the lives of consumers and farmers, and made it possible to have a sustainable food system that creates affordable prices and good food. But in Europe, we're walking those ideas back. A lot of people are against pesticides. We don't want any genetic modification. So in Europe, structurally, we're banning these things. One of the things I mentioned in the article is about neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids, these are also known as neonics. These are products that we use in order to get rid of insects. In many European countries, these products are banned. And as a result of that, in France, the beet farmers were at the verge of collapse. And the beet farmers said, hey, if we don't allow these products to be used, we will lose so much of our crops that we will basically have to import food. And I think the United States prides itself in an agricultural system that is self-sustaining, but also exporting around the world. And I think that's really great. And I think it would not be wise for American politicians to try and replicate the examples of Europe that, in my view, just have not worked.
You're listening to Mornings with Joe Catenacci here on the Big Talker. Yaël Ossowski filling in. We're speaking with Bill Wirtz. You can actually go and read much of his commentary on wirtzbill.com and on his Twitter at wirtzbill. Always some great innovative stuff that'll have you scratching your head at times, but sometimes cheering along as he tweets. So, Bill, thanks for that. One thing that you mentioned that I remember even back when I was in high school, there was a huge Time magazine article, "A World Without Bees. the price we'll pay if we don't figure out what's killing the honeybee. The so-called bee apocalypse was a big topic. I remember high school projects, people talking about it in environmental class. I remember in college, people having debates. But you kind of bring up at some point in this article as well that the bee apocalypse, in a way, is something that really never happened.
To the extent that even the Washington Post figured it out, and in pieces that they published in 2015, in which they said bee populations are actually going up. Listen, pollinators are very important for our ecosystem. So we have that fact straight. So we need to get the other facts straight about bee populations correct as well. Bee populations are cyclical. So that means that on some years, in some regions, bee populations can decline. And that is something that happens in nature, and it happens all throughout history. When there was some bee population declines, the environmental activists said it's genetic modification. Then the scientists told them that that is not true. And so they said, oh, it's neonicotinoids. It's the insecticides that we use on our fields. And that has also proven not to be true. But then politicians in many countries said we need to ban neonicotinoids, these insecticides. So we replaced it in some countries with a product called sulfoxaflora, which also acts like a neonicotinoid. And then the environmental activists said, oh no, it's actually this product. So no matter what you do in modern agriculture, unless it's organic food, which is what they want to have everyone eat in the end, they will always say it kills the bees. And what I say is, look at the facts. You can go on the website of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and actually look at the statistics of how bee populations are doing. And overall, worldwide, but also by regions, bees are doing fine. Bee populations are actually increasing, and that's good. So I think we need to get the facts straight here. I think this bee apocalypse story is really to foster the political agenda of people who want to decide how consumers should eat.
Oh boy, a political agenda at play, ladies and gentlemen. In science, no way. Bill, we've got plenty of examples the past couple of years that point to that opposite. And one thing I also wanted to bring up is you do, and I would not bring this up if it was not a nationalistic point, you bring up some praise for officials in the U.S. Who actually hawk agriculture very well and who actually are not favorable to Europe's method of agriculture. Who are you kind of talk about here, and what more do you think that Europeans could actually learn from the U.S. rather than the other way around?
So I found it fascinating when U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Vilsack, hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I never know exactly how to pronounce it. When he came to, well, he didn't come to the European Parliament. He was virtually zoomed in for questions and conversations. And then the European politicians, they asked him a whole bunch of questions about the American food system and, genetic modification and pesticides. And initially, when the new administration came in, I wasn't quite sure what the agenda was going to be, but I was very positively surprised that when he talked about American agriculture, he said, look, we would like to trade with you. We'd like to trade between the two blocks, but there's also some compromises that we're not willing to make for the sake of our own consumers. And I think that's very important, is that we have to realize that for people who want to have their local food, who want to buy local, who want to have American agriculture be sustainable and be affordable, not to be just a luxury product. So you have to buy from abroad if you want the regular food. And if you can afford it, you can eat local, which is increasingly what we do in Europe. I think he made that point very clear, is that there are significant differences in how we treat these problems. A major difference between the United States and Europe is that in Europe, we subsidize agriculture, as do the Americans, but we subsidize it considerably more. So there's a lot of taxpayer money that goes into sustaining farmers who would have been able to sustain themselves if we hadn't banned so many of the crop protection products that they need in order to get through the years without having insects eat up all their crops. So I think so far I'm optimistic that the current administration seems to understand the point that replicating everything that is done in Europe would not be a good idea for U.S. agriculture. It's
a great insight there from Bill Wirtz, who's our a colleague over there in the European Union, giving us some great facts here on the Mornings with Joe Catenacci show. We're rounding out the hour here, Bill, but in the last minute, One thing I wanted to ask, because it is kind of a new food trend that we have here throughout the States, the entire idea of organic and eating organic and labels. And you have stores like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, that sell these things, and people love them and they'll spend more money. Is this a broader trend? Is this something that we're seeing legislators actually trying to recommend or to require? What is your sort of take on the whole industry of the organic foods?
Well, I only have 60 seconds, so I only can push so many facts on you. The food market in the US, 4% of that is organic. In Europe, it's 8%. European politicians want to make it 25%. Here's a couple of things that consumers need to know about, and if you don't trust me, you can go online and look this up. Organic food per se is not healthier or more nutritious than food coming from conventional agriculture. There's the erroneous belief as well that organic food does not use pesticides. It does. It actually uses pesticides that are labeled organic, but that many people, if they look them up, would not consider to be, a natural organic phenomenon. So organic food uses pesticides. And then the last big problem, I think, is going to be for farmers and consumers when we try to increase organic food when consumers don't want it. The EU wants to increase organic production from 8% to 25%. And the question we should ask is, if we do that, if consumers now don't actually buy 25%, who's going to come up with the money for those 17% lost? Because farmers realize that if we increase production, but then demand doesn't follow up, the prices will crash, and that will really hurt farmers. And I think that's a really significant problem there. If we want our farmers to have social sustainability, we want a farming sector that is based on the choice of farmers and the choice of consumers, then we can't have government mandate that you go to Whole Foods. That shouldn't be the solution. If you want to go to Whole Foods, have at it, go there. But it's not something that most consumers want, and we should respect their choices.
There we go. The guy who's always on message, always fun to read. That's Bill Wirtz. Bill, thanks so much for coming on the morning program.
Thank you.
All the best, and we'll be back after this break with much more. We got a great another hour coming your way. Stay tuned to the Big Talker 106.7 FM. Yaël Ossowski filling in for Joe. We'll be right back after this. And welcome back to Mornings with Joe Catenacci. I'm your host, Yaël Ossowski, filling in for Joe as he fills his glass in the Outer Banks, enjoying it with his family, as he does every year. I'm sure he's talked about that a little bit on the air. So we had a couple great segments there with Rachel Chiu and with my colleague Bill Wirtz. Talked a little bit about, everything. We talked about capitalism and socialism and how we need more rights and more voices, voices for minorities, specifically on those questions, because we don't have that enough. Rachel had a great article in the Orange County Register all about that. We also talked about the disinformation dozen, social media regulation, and how the White House got a little bit too involved when it was trying to make its points on vaccines, vaccinations, the pandemic, and the like. So there's a lot to not like exactly in what the White House is doing. And then also talked about the food delivery fiascos happening in New York City. So Rachel's always good for that perspective, always giving us some very good insight. And her articles are amazing. So definitely someone to follow. And then we talked to my colleague Bill, Luxembourgish fella. He's got a lot of charm. He's got a nice writing hand. Put out an article about agriculture policy. Agriculture, not something you think about every day, but when you go to the store, you go to the Whole Foods, the Trader Joe's, the Harris Teeter, you look at organic options. Why is this twice as expensive as the normal version? Bill also talks about that, but also how the Europeans are trying to creep their way into American agriculture. We have a lot of green and environmental groups that are learning lessons from Europe in terms of how they want to do it. And when we think of the European agriculture system, it's something that's so subsidized, so mixed up with taxation. It just really gives you some perverse incentives. So not the best thing that we've got coming out of Europe for that. So good thing that Bill was here to give us a little bit more information on it, and we can understand exactly what is happening. And not every day that we hear that actually some administration officials, particularly in Biden's administration, in Tom Vilsack, Secretary of Agriculture, actually doing something pretty good. This is not always the case, so pretty good to hear that great things are happening in terms of some good policy people in the Biden administration. And the focus on the Biden administration has been huge for the last week. You guys have heard it on this station. You've heard it on others. I think Andrew Donaldson, who covered for Joe on Monday, gave a great analysis on basically what had happened in Afghanistan, sort of a point of view of someone who had been in the military and someone who has been deployed, someone who's had to deal with evacuations and had to deal with situations not as chaotic as this. But certainly to give you a perspective that, the planners and the bureaucrats and the people who are supposed to be behind the scenes really makes it think that things don't work anymore. Do you get that feeling? Do you get that feeling that things are just not working as they used to? Things are breaking. People are telling lies. I mean, people have been lying forever. But we never really thought that we'd actually come to a point where we're not trusting political officials on matters of war, public health officials. All of that is not working. Pandemic stuff, there's all these things that are happening. You have Australia that's locked down to really no recognition. You can't even order a drink outside. I actually spoke with an Australian colleague, and we were commenting on the different mask rules and how there was an example of a couple guys that went to a pub crawl and they got drinks outside. They would walk up with their masks on. They take them off to drink, put them back on. They go to the next pub. Apparently, this was used as the worst example of what COVID behavior is. If you ask me, that just sounds like normal behavior of people having a good time being with their friends. I thought that's what society was all about. I guess not. So there's all kinds of that stuff that's happening. But does anyone know what they're doing anymore? Is everybody just winging it? Is that kind of what's happening here? Is it the fact that essentially all this kind of story that we've been told about power and authority and good governance, so much of it is just fallen by the wayside? We saw it when it came to President Trump. The way that people saw Trump was not like a normal figure. He was seen like a demonic figure to those who come from the more progressive side, which, in a way, every opposing political force is going to do that. You've seen the memes about Joe Biden. We saw the memes about Bush. We've seen the memes about Obama. But with Trump, it was a very simple kind of criticism. It was, this man is so out of the norm, so out of the ordinary, that we must go out of our way. We must make our system illiberal in order to go after him because he is illiberal. We saw that with the impeachment over what happened in Ukraine or did not happen in Ukraine. We saw it with the entire dogged claims the whole time about Russian interference. And now we see this new president who has this is a real crisis in Afghanistan. This is not made up. This is not, I mentioned earlier in the program, it's our first real foreign policy crisis that we've seen as Americans in a long time. And there's actually something that's happening. There are people losing their lives. There are people who are fearing for tomorrow in a way that we haven't seen in a while. And essentially, Biden gets to carry on. Whatever your view on staying in Afghanistan or not, the way that it was done, not at all efficient, not at all safe, not really considerate. There are so many people who were working for the American forces as translators. We know that from Iraq. We know that from the first Persian Gulf War. And they were just kind of left there. And I've seen comments from a couple of organizations. There are veterans organizations, and they also help settle people who are working with American troops in various war zones, saying that they sent all their plans. They told them exactly how to do it. They identified tens of thousands of people who were there that they were able to get out. And no one listened. No one in the administration listened. No one in the Pentagon listened. I don't want to get into that because I think there's a lot of things you could say about different apparatuses throughout the federal government, but it just seems that stuff ain't working. I don't know if you agree with me. Things that we thought would be efficient and smooth and work great are just not. And I don't know where this breakdown is coming from. I don't know where this all went awry. Could it be that it all goes back to 2008 and the recession? Does it go back to 9/11? Is it just that Trump presented such a break in the paradigm that basically particularly elites in policy and economics and in academia, they don't know what to do anymore. Their worlds are shattered. There's actually a great book that I have, The Revolt of the Public. It's up here on my bookshelf. This is a great book that talks about how the reason that a lot of this is happening is just the hyper-information age and the internet that is allowing people to comment, that is allowing people to interact, to share stories, to see immediately what's happening in Egypt or in Florida or in Minneapolis with Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. People are able to immediately see that, draw their own conclusion. They don't need gatekeepers. And in a way, it's harder for elite centers of power to hold on to control. That's why he calls it the revolt of the public. Let me find actually the author of this. Martin Gurry, I believe is his name. Revolt of the Public. Got to make sure I give out the correct book recommendations here on the Big Talker. The Revolt of the Public and Crisis of Authority in the New Millennium. So you can buy this book on Amazon. I'm a big fan of Amazon, so that's fine. But yes, Martin Gurry is the author. This came out in 2018. Much of it was about the revolutions that happened in Tunisia, the Arab Spring, throughout the Middle East. So a lot of this, you could say it's a bit dated by now, even though Trump does make sort of an appearance throughout this book. But the idea that things are just not working like they used to, perhaps that's the theory. That it's because of technology, it's because of the huge spreading of information, it's because of social media channels. They're not able to keep it together. And if they're not able to keep it together in centers of power, in various elites, that means it's time for us to get smart. That means that we have to use our platforms to provide intelligent criticisms, and we can offer something as an alternative. Many of you have had ideas about how things should work, and they should work better. Now's kind of the time to express that. Use your social media channels for that. Write letters to your city council. I know that Lillian Beecroft, who was on yesterday, she talked a lot about the impact of local government, how you in Wilmington can make a big difference, how people in North Carolina can make a difference. And it's exactly this that I think we have in our power right now. It's very simple and easy to set up a YouTube page, to go on your Facebook Live. It's very simple to put together something. You can ask someone to help you out with a camera or whatever. But now is the time to present your ideas and your alternatives. And I'll tell you, in this kind of, arena that we have now, people will listen to you. If you got something smart to say, if you thought about it, if you've done the research, if you provide a good alternative, people are going to listen. And I think now is kind of the time. It's the time to do that. It's the time to think about it. It's the time to do it. I think there's so much that's happening positively or negatively that you likely have an opinion on, that you would like to change. It's not just about griping. We hear a lot of people griping. We hear a lot of people complaining. A lot of people tweet at me with complaints. But really, with the internet, with the research available, with many of the experiences that you guys have as ordinary people, as taxpayers, as citizens, as professionals, you've learned a lot. You've picked up a lot, and you see how things work, what things don't work. What do you think about that? If you like that, let me know. Send me a message. I think it is the good time to do it. I think we're seeing this kind of strange breakdown of order that people are just not computing anymore. It's the meme. Can't compute. That's what I'm seeing a lot here, and it's kind of unfortunate what's happened there. We're going to come back for Hour 3 coming up. It's been a great morning here. Mornings with Joe Catenacci, Yaël Ossowski filling in. We've got 2 more interviews to go. Julie Gunlock, David Clement. Stick around. You won't want to miss it. We'll be right back here on Big Talker. Happy Friday morning, everybody. We're back here, Mornings with Joe Catenacci. I'm Yaël Ossowski, filling in for Joe while he's out at the beach enjoying his good life. And I got to tell you, it's been a very exciting morning. We've got still a couple of interviews to come. We've got Julie Gunlock coming on after the next break, and my usual co-host, David Clement, will be coming on as well. And the number of topics that we've covered, we've gotten a good amount about politics. We've talked about what's happening in the big cities across the state of North Carolina. I wanted to focus a little bit on tech news for this kind of segment. There's a lot of things that I'll normally discuss with Joe every time I'm on the Fridays. And you guys can always go to the website, go to bigtalkerfm.com, where you can find the archives. You can find the entire schedule of programming that we have here at the Big Talker. Great stuff for everybody, certainly for anybody who is interested in ideas and ideas that can change the world. Big Talker is the place to be. So the big update that we're hearing about is apparently iPhones, Apple iPhones. Those of you who are out there who've got your iPhones, you're listening now perhaps on the app, perhaps later on the podcast version. You've got this iPhone, and there's a new update coming wherein Apple has a new feature that will protect the children. So this is on Apple's website, they have an entire technical summary. It is called CSAM detection. And what it is going to do is it's actually going to remove this encryption that exists on iCloud and backing up your phone and trying to match it to different material related to child pornography, child sexual abuse. Quoting from the Apple technical summary here, CSAM detection enables Apple to accurately identify and report iCloud users who store known child sexual abuse material in their iCloud Photos accounts. Apple servers flag accounts exceeding a threshold number of images that match a known database of CSAM image hashes so that Apple can provide relevant information to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This process is secure and is expressly designed to preserve user privacy. Now, this is pretty fascinating. Apple is well known as the tech company, the phone manufacturer that is very conscious of privacy and encryption. There have been a number of cases. Some of you might remember the San Bernardino shooter. Basically, the government, the FBI, was trying to get into the phone. They couldn't. They asked Apple for help. Apple refused, and that's how it stopped. And they had pressure from the government. They had pressure from the Attorney General at the time. And Apple is fairly well known in these days for protecting privacy and for their encryption. And what we see with this update now is basically they're going to have a database of terrible child images, sexual images of children. Apparently, they're going to have some database on their server, which I don't want to be, talking to the guy who's in charge of this, but they're going to have a database, and if any of the pictures in that database flag on anyone's iCloud account, meaning you take a picture and you upload it to Apple's version of the cloud, then you're going to be put in the database. People are going to be flagged, and I'm guessing that will be forwarded to law enforcement and to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Now, I don't think anyone is going to say this is a bad idea because we shouldn't track this type of information or these types of photos or images. They're despicable. We know that. Many of us are fathers and mothers and would never want to deal with this type of situation and surely don't want any of this stuff getting into any hands. But we see that Apple is changing its tune a bit on how it's going to push for privacy. And there have been a lot of activists, a lot of the online tech nerd world, unite tech nerds, who are saying that Apple is really going too far here and that they might be going down a dangerous path. And it's not just a couple of tech nerds online who are making this point. Actually, the German parliament, it's the chairman of the Digital Agenda Committee. I'm chairman of the Digital Agenda Committee. Beat that. So he actually wrote a letter to Apple and says that they're going down a dangerous path while undermining safe and confidential information. He later called it the largest surveillance instrument of history and could make Apple lose access to large markets whether the company keeps with this strategy. So this is only going to launch in the US, and there's going to be sort of a description that will be available in all of the updates. But it's really fascinating to see this change by Apple for their devices. I think many of you care about your security, your privacy online. You care about, the messages that you're sending with your friends, with your family, with your coworkers. There's a reason that people like to use particularly Apple devices, because they have security. And as far as we have known from the very beginning, things like iMessages have been encrypted, and even Apple did not know what the content was. This is going to be a big change. And while we always can assume that it is for the children, we have to wonder how far this is going to go. Again, I don't think anyone will disagree with the goal of eradicating child pornography. No one will say that. However, if there's this entire system in Apple that is changing the way that the iPhones scan the information, that means that they're looking at what you're sending. That means that they're going to have a database that they're matching. What does it mean if I send a picture of my daughter who's taking a bath to my family? Will I be tagged? Will I be in some database or be arrested? For any of you who might be with your kids at the beach and they're hanging out and you take a picture. I mean, this is the kind of the stuff that we don't really know if it'll work. We don't know what it'll mean for individuals. And for many of the privacy advocates, they're saying, well, if this exists for everything related to child sexual images, who's to say it won't apply to people who might be deemed terrorist, or the disinformation dozen, if we remember that from another segment. The people who are questioning things about the pandemic, about lockdowns, about efficacy of vaccines, does that mean that they're on a list? We already know that the Biden administration is keeping tabs on the SMS network at individual text messages that are not encrypted and seeing if people are denying vaccines and everything else. We're seeing a huge level of shift, a lot of pressure that's being put on Silicon Valley. Now, is this a move by Apple preemptively? Is it a move because they're responding to law enforcement that's been coming down hard on them? That I'm not sure. The only official statements we've gotten from Apple is actually a lot of confusion that people would be against this. They really don't see that there's a big issue when it comes to flagging material that could be considered child sexual images, child pornography, this kind of stuff. But they really got to be careful here. Because again, as long as you open that up, governments are going to ask for additional backdoors. Governments always want to have information. Any television show or series that you guys watch where the police are involved, what is the first thing they go to? They go to the person's phone. They're trying to get it with the guy's thumbprint. They're trying to figure out the password from the girlfriend. They're trying to do everything they can to crack the phone. If they can just use perhaps this excuse, could it go very far? Could they just say, well, it's suspected that they might have this on their phone, get a warrant, and they're able to go through it? It's going to be a bit interesting to see how Apple kind of responds to this whole thing, because this is it's a path that definitely will change a lot of minds about Apple products, about encryption, about technology, how it's going to be used in the future. We have a growing debate about social media companies' moderation of particular material. There's a lot of stuff that I've said on Joe's program here on The Big Talker where, yeah, who knows? I was against what the established norms were of the World Health Organization at the time. Does that mean that my account would have been deleted? Does that mean that my bank would have gotten a notice? Be careful, disinformation, Yaël, is loose. It's this kind of stuff that we have to worry about. There's a reason that we should champion a term known as technological neutrality. We should not have the government choose winners and losers. And we know that encryption is something that saves lives. People use encryption in order to send classified material. People use encryption to send things between their friends and their family. It's something that's vital to the way that the internet works. It's the underlying basis for a lot of cryptocurrencies and the entire digital economy. And to see that this might be changed, might be turned on a dime because of Apple's update is really going to make some heads shake. And I'm wondering what you guys think about this. Really interesting to see Apple here. We'll have to see also what the Google Android devices do with their software. Does that mean that other software, other phones are going to come up and compete? We can only hope so. I think competition is good. Having as many of these companies as possible, delivering us great products, why not? That's the great, beautiful part of the market. It's one thing that we love to see. Hopefully there will be more competition. There will be more people discussing this, and we'll see how Apple goes. But for individual users, again, we can get into some tech tips later. But we're going to have the next segment with Julie Gunlock of the Independent Women's Forum. She's gonna tell us a little bit about social media regulation and a brand new network that she has put together with her colleagues over there that is aimed at smart women who want to fight for their country, who don't trust typical social media channels. Julie's going to tell us all about that network. It's going to be a great conversation, so stay tuned here to The Big Talker. This is Mornings with Joe Catenacci, Yaël Ossowski filling in for today. We'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned, 106.7. It's Mornings with Joe Catenacci. Yaël Ossowski filling in here. Been a great morning. We're now in hour 3, and I got a treat for you guys. I am very, very blessed because our guest for the next segment is Julie Gunlock. She's the Senior Policy Analyst at the Independent Women's Forum, where she directs the Center for Progress and Innovation. She's the host of the Bespoke Parenting Hour podcast, and she's the author, we shall not forget, of From Cupcakes to Chemicals, How the Culture of Alarmism Makes Us Afraid of Everything and How to Fight Back. Julie, thanks so much for being on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me. I promise my next book will be like one word. That's always such a mouthful. Thanks for saying it.
No worries. It's all the magic of radio. It makes it a lot of fun. So, Julie, I wanted to have you on. I know you've opined on many different topics that are happening in the news, and I think we'll get to that. But you are part of this project that I found fascinating, the Independent Women's Network. So this seems to be a new platform, free from censorship, free from cancellation, and you've set it up along with your colleagues to provide basically a wonderful space where women like yourself can actually engage with ideas and topics, and they don't have to worry about being canceled. What is this about, and how can people who are interested get involved?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. So the network is a new project of IW. The Independent Women's Forum is where I run this sort of science project, and I also run a podcast there. But we wanted to set up a network, and it's a members only group. So there is a small fee. It's $5. It goes as low as $5 a month to be a member of IWN. And I think this is, a lot of women will relate to this idea of suddenly you're not allowed to talk about certain things. You're not allowed to question certain things for fear of not just cancellation. And I think cancellation, the word cancellation can be overused, but there is bullying that goes on, another overused word. But I've experienced this, or sort of harassment, or being made fun of, or being made to feel like you're some sort of Luddite who doesn't want, progress in the world, or who doesn't, or who is engaging in wrongthink, which is, obviously usually reserved for conservatives, but not just conservatives. Now it's gotten to a point where, I have friends who are Democrats. I have friends who are liberals who say that they're even afraid to ask questions or to bring up certain topics. And so I think what we wanted to do, or I know what we want to do, is set up a network where women can talk freely, can really grapple with issues and talk about controversial subjects without the fear that they're going to be harassed for this. And when I do say cancellation, I do think that still applies. I sort of, and y'all, I think you too we're sort of uncancelable. Like that's our job, is to talk about controversial subjects, to write about controversial subjects. So nobody can really cancel me because, again, I'm paid to do this. But when you think about, there are people in my town, for instance, who are real estate agents, or who run small businesses like restaurants, or they might run an auto repair shop. I know for certain, I have been told by these people who run these small businesses, that they really have to be careful about what they say, because they're afraid it'll cost them their businesses. They feel like there'll be retribution, or maybe that their regular customers will stop coming, or maybe, suddenly an inspector will show up. They're very afraid. And, you can call them paranoid, but I think that this is a real concern out there. And so we wanted to offer this group up to women who feel restricted in what they can and want to talk about, to offer them a place where they can come and have these conversations, the conversations they're not supposed to be having. We still believe in civility and being polite and being kind, but that doesn't mean you can't bring up things that might sort of be off limits in another forum. So that's kind of the idea behind this. We want women to have support. We want them to have good, interesting, thoughtful conversation, grappling with really tough issues. And feel confident and sort of unobstructed to have these conversations with other women who are also looking for that kind of rigorous debate.
So the website is iwnetwork.com, which a lot of people can get into. I'm really interested by any alternative social media network. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I think we have all the tools available to do so. I guess, more of not a technical question, but more in terms of building this community. Have you found that people are a bit reluctant to leave their normal social media channels?
Oh, no.
They're not afraid that it's a new thing and they're not going to be able to learn it, or people are ready to jump in?
It's interesting because I think this is a really great time for innovation, because the sort of established platforms are a joke, right? They're terrible. The idea that the head of the Taliban is on Twitter, but Donald Trump isn't, is like, you can hate Donald Trump and you can disagree with everything he says, but just wrap your head about that one. Okay. The Taliban, who throws people off buildings, who sets caged men on fire, who treats women like, I don't want to say dogs, because I don't even think dogs should be treated that way. I mean, this is an absurdity, okay, that we have these social media platforms out there, and Facebook too, and increasingly Instagram and all the other sort of, it's funny to say that these are established social media programs when social media hasn't been around that long, but look, they're all part of this coalition to kill conversation, to kill free thought. And so there is such a hunger for places where people can, and again, it's not a safe space. This is what we're opening, and what we're creating here is not a safe space. And in fact, when you come here, you're gonna see some really interesting conversations going on today. For instance, in one of our chat rooms, in one of the IW network chat rooms, we have Claudia Rosette, who is a world-renowned journalist, and she is going to be doing sort of an AMA in our chat room on politics, talking about Afghanistan and what this means for Taiwan, what this means for the Ukraine, and what this means for other regional countries like Turkey. How is Turkey going to respond to this? It's really fascinating conversations. And if you think that, we're going to all agree on this, that's madness. We won't agree. And Claudia will be answering questions and taking questions from women. But we on these chat rooms, we also talk about, masking in schools. We talk about the coronavirus vaccines. We have really great conversations on this network. And again, the reason we're having these great conversations is because you can't have these conversations in a lot of formats, certainly on Facebook and Twitter. So, and again, I'm not saying that you can't ever have good conversations on this, but there is this risk you're taking of either cancellation or harassment. I've left most of the online platforms that I used to engage in because it's just become many, especially in a dark blue city like where I live, the sort of local Facebook groups and local, Twitter accounts are just, they don't really want to talk freely. They don't want to grapple with these ideas. And so I think this is why we're seeing this kind of innovation. We're seeing these member groups pop up, and IW really is a great organization. We are we are made up of women who have various opinions on things. We often have these sort of email back and forths where we try to figure out IW's position on certain issues. And what we wanted to do is bring that same sort of situation to women who are desperate for that kind of conversation.
You're listening to the Big Talker FM. We're speaking with Julie Gunlock. She's talking to us about the Independent Women's Network, IWNetwork.com, where you can, quote, connect with other strong, smart, and independent women and fight for a better country. All in on the alternative social media channels. I think this is great. Julie, one other thing I wanted to ask you about, I know that you're having to deal with this as a parent.
Yep.
Thankfully, my daughter is a bit too young, so we don't have to deal with the public school monstrosities. But we're being told every other week that a new expert opinion tells us that we either need to mask our children or we need to have new distancing rules or various things on the vaccines. And that is something that you're a bit uncomfortable with. And I know you've written for many years on science, about the experts, about public opinion. What is the pandemic and the so-called experts and how that's playing out? What does that kind of mean for social trust in our institutions? And what do you think about that evolution?
Yeah, I think that this is a really important question. And I think it is an incredibly, I think the loss of trust in some of our public institutions, and one of those institutions being public health. Okay, so when I say public health, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know this, but some don't. Public health is sort of the government agencies that make up, the healthcare system. So you have the CDC, HHS, and several other sort of smaller agencies. NIH, these are agencies that receive federal funding and do a lot of science research. When those agencies start to get it wrong so many times and then show absolutely no humility in admitting that they might have gotten it wrong. I'll give you an example that's sort of outside of vaccines and outside of masking and outside of this coronavirus world that we're now finding ourselves in. Because I've written about this for years, this sort of flip-flopping on nutrition, right? So you had, in the 1990s, when I was in college, I remember like the big thing was no sugar and no eggs, right? And so they had all these, no fat and no eggs. So it was like SnackWells. And I remember being in college and watching one of my roommates eat an entire package of SnackWells. I mean, the entire container of SnackWells. And she claimed, oh, this is good for her. And I was like, there's still calories in that, right? And I remember telling her like, okay, I know it's like low fat, but you still have lots of sugar and this, and us having this conversation, right? But it was kind of the marketing of that at that time. And this was all guided by, public health saying that you should really have low fat diets, which has of course been reversed now. People are putting like butter in their coffee, for God's sake, right? And then you had like the no eggs. So my father's a big breakfast guy, right? And I always tell this story that for like a decade, my poor father was eating egg white omelets, okay? And like, removing the egg yolks, which frankly is the best part of the egg, right? From all things, right? And then just about 5 years ago, the public health sort of industry comes out and says like, oops, we were wrong about eggs. Okay. After almost destroying the egg industry, by the way, in the United States, like the egg industry reeled from this. The farmers were desperate to get people to start eating eggs. There was all this idea that eggs were like the great killer in America. And this isn't it. We see this with everything out there. We see this with wine. We see this with coffee. We see this with bacon. We see this with deli meats. We see this with any kind of packaged food. We see this with the GMO issue. We see this with organic foods. This same narrative of this is going to kill you. And then, oops, we were wrong, right? And so the loss of trust and respect in the public health sector didn't start with this whole coronavirus stuff and Fauci and masking. It has been going on for decades. And so then something big like this happens, right? And the vaccine, and I have written extensively defending the vaccine development, praising the scientists who did this and the pharmaceutical companies and the administration for supporting this. And I have written extensively on vaccines in general, pro-vaccine. I've written in the Wall Street Journal talking about the importance of vaccines. But what frustrates me now is this whole like narrative that people are just knuckle dragging Luddites and anti-vaxxers if they ask one question about the safety and effectiveness of vaccines, or if they question something like masking. And, I think that skepticism is a really important thing. I think that people should be skeptical of things, and I think they are allowed to be skeptical of things. And so what's turned me off is that people just blame these people for being skeptical or asking questions, and yet have no criticism for a public health industry or sector that has gotten it wrong over and over again, and then again doesn't sort of apologize and get it right the next time. They continue to make these mistakes. I think we, as common people who comment on this stuff, need to show a little respect to people and need to be more respectful of people asking questions. It is perfectly acceptable before you get your 12-year-old son a vaccine to ask very important questions about some heart conditions that have arisen, and especially young boys.
Oh, wow. She's on fire, ladies and gentlemen. We've been speaking with Julie Gunlock. You guys listen to Julie on the Bespoke Parenting Hour podcast. Read her book. We'll link to all of that. Julie, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me. I feel great. I feel like I had a therapy session. I appreciate it.
And welcome back to Mornings with Joe Catenacci here on the Big Talker, 106.7 FM. Coming to you every single morning, 7 to 10 a.m. Joe Catenacci is out. I'm Yaël Ossowski filling in for Joe's seat. And since I'm in his seat, since I'm in his chair, figured I'd bring in my usual co-host of Consumer Choice Radio, David Clement. David is now in on the line. David, how's it going, my man?
It's going. No complaints. Happy to be back on Joe's program.
Yeah, we're the morning show here on Friday. It's a Freedom Friday. A lot of different topics that we've covered. It's been a busy day. Had some great people on. Had some North Carolina folk. Brought in some Europeans. Talked to Rachel Chiu up there in D.C. And we also had Julie Gunlock, David. I figured we'd feature Julie on this program and also have her on ours. So we're kind of double dipping on our guest interviews. That'd be fun. David, one thing I wanted to mention is I saw an article in the elite New York Times. Who has the cure for America's declining population? Canada. This is an article by Shika Dalmia, formerly of Reason, now a visiting fellow at the Mercatus Center in D.C. She's talking about the different population booms that happened after World War II and how today we're kind of in a slump. The census has proven that. We see the same that's happening throughout continental Europe. And when it comes to figuring out how we can increase populations, how we can get more people involved in our communities, how can we have more citizens, more taxpayers, more consumers, the answer can be found in Canada. So what exactly is this kind of story telling us, and what can we learn from Canada?
Well, I mean, Canada's just been far more open to immigration than the United States has been, and that's not just under President Trump. I mean, that goes back to President Obama as well. And what that's done is that's helped keep the Canadian economy growing and competitive, because one of the biggest kind of misconceptions about immigration is people think, okay, more people equals lower wages, right? They view supply and demand as in the same way that you would view it for like toasters. If you have a lot more toasters, there's an oversupply of toasters, prices go down, things like that. But that misses really the biggest aspect of immigration, is that people aren't just consumers, they're also producers. So they're making things. And I don't think you could pick a better success story than the United States historically in terms of immigrants coming to the United States and creating, I mean, there would be a long list of the Fortune 500 companies that exist in the United States, major tech companies, new innovations. For a long time, the U.S. was kind of that bastion of making a better life for yourself. And Canada was too, and now Canada is more highlighted in light of what's changed in the United States. And so I think the Canadian example does provide some fairly good examples in regards to how you create a system that that evaluates migrants in kind of a respectable way, ensures some kind of basic functional requirements, but is generally much more open to immigrants. And we've certainly seen that multicultural approach work in many aspects in Canada, especially in the large cities like Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal and things like that. So I do definitely think that Canada is a very good example of how the U.S. can try and counter some of their issues with population decline, because that's also a big economic issue.
Oh, yeah. And it is a big one that is impacting a lot of stuff. And if we see entrepreneurship be pushed overseas or across the border because of regulations, well, you're going to need much more of an innovative sector. You're going to need more enterprising people who are going to take that on. We're speaking with David Clement here on the Mornings with Joe Catenacci show. Yaël Ossowski filling in. David, one thing that's interesting in this article, and just generally the difference between the two countries, is that actually you have a good measure of federalism that's thrown into the immigration system in Canada. The various provinces have various criteria. They typically have a quota, and we don't really have that in the United States. We don't have, let's say, in North Carolina, particular quota of 2 to 3 million. Everything's kind of done through the federal government. Do you think that this would perhaps, by getting the states involved, do you think that would make things tougher? Do you think it make things easier? Do you think it would lead to more or less immigrants? What do you think that would look like?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. It would allow for some states to really reap the benefits of immigration, and it would highlight in real time. Look, there are some states that I don't think would be on board with that, but they'll miss out on the economic gains from immigration in the same way that a lot of states like New York State is missing out on the gains that we see in Florida. I mean, that's interstate migration, but it's more or less the same concept. And so I think it would be great. I mean, in regards to Afghan refugees, we saw Jared Polis in Colorado issue a letter to the president saying that Colorado would like to help in regards to whatever that resettlement is, and some other states have kind of hopped on board. If you had a more federalist approach, it would allow for some states to be a little more compassionate in terms of accepting both migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees, all the kind of legal distinctions for migrants. And so it could be beneficial. There would be a negative side to that, where there would be some states who would go the other way, which is unfortunate, but that's probably better than what the U.S. is currently doing.
Yeah, definitely. We see that probably in Quebec, my home province, much the same, putting different requirements for language, for speaking, and, you wouldn't have that in a place like Louisiana or Texas or New York. That's one thing I always find really interesting. And when it comes to the immigration debate in the U.S., we always have this idea that the system is broken. The system is broken, and no one necessarily defines it. And that's why I like some of the progressive politicians, because they say it's a wreck, and they usually say why. Sometimes, I think they're totally wrong and off base, but other times, hey, it's like they're trying to prescribe it. So they would look at the system and say it takes too long for applications, people aren't able to immigrate with family members right away, there's all these fees and fines. I know my family, when we immigrated, we had to pay all types of fees, and that's not even thinking about lawyers who have to deal with this. The fact that you need lawyers for this is a whole other thing. Most countries, you don't need that, but it's so complicated.
I mean, you could make it as simple as, and this is to address some of the economic concerns. I certainly think it could be more open than this, but you could literally just do some sort of screening for infectious diseases, some sort of screening for links to criminal organizations, and basically like an enhanced criminal background check. And do you have a job? Like, is there a willing employer for you? Boom. Okay, you're accepted. And generally speaking, I mean, the history of U.S. immigration was far more open than that for a long time. And what's great about it is so much of that is now become part of U.S. culture. and what it means to be American. I mean, the Irish migrants who came. That's I mean, look at St. Patrick's Day celebrations all over the U.S. Same goes for Italians in New York and New Jersey. The concerns about migration for Italians and Irish people, it was all pretty much the same headlines as what we see now, just obviously years ago. And they didn't really pan out, or they didn't pan out in the same way that the naysayers did. And I think that if the U.S. were to go with that older approach and you put in some safeguards, you'd largely reap the same benefits that the United States is seeing with the previous migrants that have fled famine or war or oppression, or just looking for better opportunities, looking for a country where they can make a better go of it in a freer economy and really be judged on their merits.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about there, because we don't have to necessarily look to another country. We don't necessarily have to look to Canada. We can just look in American history, and we have to look back to how it was and how many people immigrated here. That's why there are, the largest silent minority in the United States are German immigrants who all came in during the late 1800s and much the same. And with all the different German names, believe me, I asked them. They don't speak German, but they have German roots and they've made their way across. David, in closing here, another thing I was thinking about is when it comes to the bureaucracy, can things be improved? Because at least in Austria, we have this immigration department, and there was an expose that just came out saying that they don't answer the phone. They actually notoriously reject people just based on their name. It's actually pretty corrupt, pretty bad. Do you think that there's a lot of reforms that can be done bureaucratically to help improve the immigration situation in the U.S., or does it more have to do with kind of the politicians who push the reforms?
Well, I think you do have to reform the institutions of how you process migrants. And the really important thing here is that the more streamlined you make that process, the less likely you are to have people immigrate illegally. Right? Part of the reason why people cross the border through Texas or New Mexico or wherever is because the process to legally immigrate is so difficult. And then obviously you have organized crime piggyback off of that, and human trafficking and some really ugly things. And so by streamlining that process, making it easier to legally migrate to the U.S., you actually make it far less likely that people illegally migrate. So it has that benefit too. And so, yeah, I would agree with you that the need is to streamline that process, the bureaucracy. It's way, way too bloated. Highlight what your key concerns are, screen and address those in the approval process, and then get out of the way.
Cut the tape. Awesome.
Yes.
This is David Clement. You can hear us tomorrow, actually, on Consumer Choice Radio, 10 a.m. Eastern. David is the North American Affairs Manager at the Consumer Choice Center, doing great work up and down the coast all over North America. David, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
All right, and we'll be right back here on the Joe Catenacci Show. Mornings with Joe Catenacci here on the Big Talker, 106.7 FM. I'm Yaël Ossowski filling in, rounding out your Friday. Thank you for joining us throughout the course of the day. I mean, it's been a slam-packed day full of interviews. Hope you guys have had a good time listening to the conversations. Not as many debates as we're used to, but a good time to be here on the program. Again, you can listen to the full version once it hits in podcast form. You can look Mornings for Joe Catenacci up in your podcast device. You can also go to our YouTube, Facebook pages. You'll find the entire program from beginning until end on there, and you'll be able to revel in the past interviews that we've had. I mean, it started off talking about Star Wars and the things that we can learn about life, politics, and liberty from the Star Wars series. That was with Stephen Kent. North Carolina boy, so good to have him a bit on the radio. He's up there in D.C. most of the time. He's a television star. He's kind of a media star. Great to have him on the Big Talker. We also had Rick Henderson, another North Carolina favorite. He's got a great website, Social Fabric. That is a Substack where he's writing about all things community, liberty, and gave us a little bit of insight into the night markets, free exchange at these markets that are popping up in Raleigh and Asheville and across the state. Saw some very interesting stuff that's coming up out of those places, and something that probably is happening in Wilmington. We don't even know it. It could be the right places. We just got to go find them. But definitely great convo with him. And then Morgan Rinehart. He's of the Charlotte Neoliberals. We talked about the neoliberal movement, a little bit about what it all means. There's definitely a lot to learn there. It's something that will be a bit interesting in years to come. A lot of young people are into this. Did you really think, and I know we talk a lot about building and construction on this program, on Joe's program, a lot about the construction industry. Did you ever think there'd be a group of young people excited by the prospect of removing zoning regulations and rules? Did you ever think it would happen? I know that for the Cape Fear Home Builders Association, which is a proud sponsor of the program and of the station, something they would love to hear. And there's a lot of people who are interested in that. And just very fascinating that there's a neoliberal movement using that moniker, something that normally would be very negative, but basically giving us a new insight, new political movement. That was with Morgan Rinehart. That was in the first segment. We had Rachel Chiu on. She's great, talking to us about socialism and capitalism and how minority voices are never included in that debate. And we never hear about people who come from Vietnam, people who come from China, people who've actually had to live in many of these areas. We don't really hear their experience. We never really hear their side of the story in these debates. It's the social democrats, it's the democratic socialists. They usually come up on that side, present the information, and get no questions, no debate, and surely not for people who've actually experienced things like socialism and communism in Eastern Europe. So it was great to talk to Rachel about that. Talked a little bit about agriculture with Bill Wirtz, my colleague, Luxembourgish fella. He's got some very good insights on why we should actually be very proud of our agricultural policy here in the U.S. and how the Europeans are aiming to try to export their bad policies over here, joined by a lot of green environmental groups. They're trying to bring us old school agriculture, no use of pesticides, no use of technology, going back to old school. Not something we like, not good for innovation, not good for food prices, by the way. That would cause them to spike. If you think it's expensive shopping at Whole Foods now, just wait until they basically force organic on absolutely everything. That means prices will go up on all your normal grocery items. Definitely not something that we want here. Great insight from Bill on that. Julie Gunlock, for those of you who are interested, who have a woman in your life, or perhaps you are a female, and you think a little bit outside of the box, you're tired of being pushed around by some of the social media networks, perhaps you've been censored or blocked, there's a new network for you. We talked about that with Julie Gunlock. It is iwnetwork.com. Free-spirited, independent women who gather on there, have debates, have conversations, and they don't fear getting canceled. They don't fear getting bullied. It's an entirely new network for that. And then we talked about immigration with my colleague David Clement and co-host. Normally you can hear us Saturdays at 10 here on The Big Talker, and we were able to talk a little bit about the lessons we can learn, particularly when it comes to federalism and immigration. And with everything that's happened in Afghanistan the past couple of weeks and the past couple of days, which you've probably heard about incessantly, there's going to be a new debate on refugees, likely going to be a new crisis in Europe. So this is going to come back into the headlines at some point. And it means that we got to be prepared, and we also need to know the good arguments, and we need to understand what kind of immigration system do we want to have? Do we want to plan? What kind of people do we want? Because the most enterprising people, many of whom are entrepreneurs, are these immigrants who come here, are refugee asylum seekers who come here, provide a better life. There's going to be a lot more on that. And I think David kind of broke it down, gave us some good Canadian examples on there. So it's going to be a beautiful weekend in Wilmington. I know it's a bit rainy overnight for some of you, but you've been able to enjoy the smooth sounds of Big Talker Radio here on 106.7 FM. Joe is going to be back next week. He's finishing off his vacation with his rowdy bunch, his rowdy family. I'm sure he'll have plenty of stories to tell you guys upon his return. And I really got to give it up again for the guest host this week. Andrew Donaldson did a great job on Monday laying it down. He put together great interviews, great insight. His podcast, by the way, is Heard Tell. If I don't know if he plugged it enough. Andrew's got to do a little bit more plugging for himself. But he's got a great podcast, not just because I have been on it, but because he gathers very smart people to discuss these issues, to go a little bit behind the headlines. I think he does an amazing job there. We had our own Lend with Ben. He was on Tuesday, giving us some good insights and information on everything related to not just credit scores and the construction industry and everything related to permits, but actually had a couple of good back and forths with our own TK Turbo. So definitely love that part. That was fun. Then we had Objection to the Forum. We had Justin on Wednesday. This guy knows how to break down the legal stuff, talked about the mask mandates in North Carolina, how they're legal, if they are legal, will they ever be legal, will vaccine passports be legal? He did a very good job there covering that. And Lillian Beecroft on Thursday, just some great insight, more about faith and community and politics. She's definitely very passionate and provided some great commentary here on the radio with some great interviews. For my part, guys, that kind of does it for the week. Pleasure to be with you all here on this Freedom Friday. On the Big Talker 106.7 FM. I'll be back next week, but you can hear me and my colleague David. You'll hear us on the radio tomorrow at 10 a.m. Here on the Big Talker, we'll be talking all things she-covery, the she-session. That's what we heard Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau say. We have to make sure that the she-session turns into a she-covery. So Dave and I talk about that, talk about some of the things happening in Afghanistan, a lot of the lockdowns in Australia and New Zealand. I mean, this stuff is getting a bit insane, a bit crazy. I know there's a lot of stuff that we deal with here in this country as Americans, but I'll tell you, I don't think we would really fall for what they're doing in Australia and New Zealand. It's a whole other level, but that's why the flag always flies high here in the United States of America. It flies high in Wilmington, and it definitely flies high here at Big Talker 106.7 FM. Go to the website, guys, bigtalkerfm.com. Check out the schedule. There's all kinds of great local programming all week long that you can find. All the podcasts and videos. Check out the YouTube. Check out the Facebook. There's so much great content that we're putting out. Pleasure to talk to you guys. I'm Yaël Ossowski signing off for the week. Mornings with Joe Catenacci here on the Big Talker. Hope to talk to you guys soon. Have a great weekend.